This is the Graceful Atheist Podcast. Welcome to the Graceful Atheist Podcast. My name is David, and I am trying to be the Graceful Atheist. A quick reminder, there are multiple ways to interact with the podcast. You can leave a voice message on anchor.fm. You can tweet at me with the hashtags #seculargrace, #deconversion, and #humanismispeople. Also, please rate and review the podcast on Apple Podcasts, subscribe, of course, and let me know what you think. On to today's episode. My guest today is Matthew Taylor. He's the co-host of the Ask an Atheist Anything podcast and the co-host of the Still Unbelievable podcast. He also has a blog called Confessions of a Young Earth Creationist. Matthew also was an editor and contributor to the book Still Unbelievable. During our conversation, we talk about Justin Brierley's podcast, Unbelievable. And for the three of you out there listening who don't already know what that is, Justin Brierley has a podcast that brings atheists and theists together to have debate. It is fairly widely praised for its relative fairness and boasts a huge audience both of atheists and believers. Justin Brierley recently wrote a book called Unbelievable and Why He Remains a Christian after so many years of hearing atheist arguments. So it's important to understand that Matthew Taylor, my guest's work, is a response to Justin Brierley's work, both in the podcast Still Unbelievable and in the book Still Unbelievable, which is available under the Creative Commons license, which means that you can read it for free online. I'll have links in the show notes. Matthew has an incredible deconversion story. It includes growing up in the mission field in Zambia. He grew up with a young earth creationist perspective and later was challenged by friends about the overwhelming evidence for evolution. Matthew also had a number of fairly dramatic, charismatic spiritual experiences during his Christianity that goes on to show why subjective experience can't be taken as proof. I want to note here that Matthew is an incredible storyteller and his deconversion story is a great one. And in many ways, I just get in the way. As I went through the editing process, I realized that Matthew had a clear sense of how his story should be told. And in many ways, I just fumbled that up. So please ignore my fumbled attempts to guide the conversation and really listen to Matthew's story and his ability to highlight the most important features of his deconversion story. And with all that, I give you Matthew Taylor. Matthew Taylor, welcome to the podcast.
Hi, David. Thank you for having me on. I'm looking forward to this.
Fantastic. Yeah, we got in touch with each other because of Tom from the Hiding in Plain Sight podcast. He was on my podcast a few episodes ago, and he's been on a podcast you co-host with Andrew Knight, the Still Unbelievable podcast.
That's right.
Tom was so nice to get us all in touch, and so I'm looking forward to this conversation as well.
Yes, credit to Tom. It was purely because of Tom that I heard about your podcast, which is to my shame because I contacted you off the back of that, having listened to some of your episodes, and you emailed back and said, yes, I enjoy listening to Still Unbelievable. And I felt quite humbled by that, actually, because I felt that I should have already been listening to you. But thank you for the compliment that you paid me back.
Yeah, no worries. I think we're all putting out our work, our content and, trying to find each other. Half of the problem is just finding one another. So
absolutely.
Yeah, this is great. So I want to go over just a brief bit of your CV for my listeners. You're the host of the Ask an Atheist Anything podcast. You're the co-host of the Still Unbelievable podcast that is kind of a response podcast to Justin Brierley's Unbelievable podcast.
That's right.
And I believe you were the editor or one of the co-authors of a book also titled Still Unbelievable. Is that correct?
That is right, yes. One of the chapters is credited to me, and I was involved in the editing process as well, obviously, but not the only person involved there. All of the authors on that book are great people. I had never met them before we got involved with the project. We kind of converged together on the project, and they're all a great bunch of people, and all with different gifts as well. And it's been brilliant working with them. I really enjoyed that process.
Yeah, it sounds amazing, and just to see how many people participated in that seems like a great piece of work.
Thank you.
So I want to get to your work a little bit later. What we want to hear to start is basically what I call our origin story. So and that is some of your Christian testimony, how you became a Christian, what your experience was as a Christian, and then how the doubts crept in, and how did you get to be the atheist that you are today?
Right. Okay. I'll rattle through this as quickly. It's quite convoluted with a few backflips along the way. So stop me at tell me to hurry up at the boring bits, and we'll hopefully we can tease out the interesting. Well, I think the first thing, just to be honest, and even as a Christian, I would say this: I was indoctrinated because I was a young child when I committed my life as a Christian, 6 or 7 years old. Yeah, probably 6 is about the right age. I grew up in Zambia in a missionary environment because part of my mother's family has a missionary legacy in Zambia of a few generations. So although I was born in the UK, I was taken out to Zambia as a young child. So until about the age of 18, Zambia and growing up in Zambia was all I knew. And I adore the country immensely, and I had some fabulous experiences growing up there. But it was all on this back shadow of growing up in the missionary environment. I went to a school right up in the northwestern province of Zambia, only a few miles, about 20 miles, I believe, from the Zairean border. Well, it was Zaire at the time I was there. It's now the Democratic Republic of Congo. Incidentally, why are undemocratic countries always have democratic?
Yeah, they're fooling no one.
Yeah, probably something to skip on that. So yeah, and the school was a boarding school, and predominantly for children in the missionary environment. It was a tough school. They didn't spare the paddle, and so yeah, as a young child, I got spanked for what I consider the most ludicrous of misdemeanors with a wooden stick.
Wow.
Which for a child that young, I have quite complex feelings about that. But there were loving teachers there as well. There are teachers who I would admire and respect to this day. So let's not paint everybody with the same brush. Sure. But it was very much a Christian missionary environment. It was also Calvinistic and Young Earth Creationist. So that was the fundamentalist environment I grew up in. In fact, one moment I remember, and I look back on it where I was shaking my head, but at the time I enjoyed doing it. We all got given brand new textbooks, science textbooks, 1 year. Because every now and then new textbooks will come out, and I happened to fortunately be one of the classes where we got new science textbooks. So all these brand new textbooks and brand new books and stuff, and we all delivered them. And the first thing we were told to do was turn to a specific page and a specific paragraph, and this paragraph. Quite poorly, I think, at the time, but it described evolution, and I'm trying to remember it as best I can. But obviously, we're rolling back 40 years, so my memory might be a bit muddy. But it was basically along the lines of describing how fish would move from puddle to puddle, and eventually their fins grew into legs, and these fish became land animals. And that's not really how it happened evolutionarily, but it described evolution in a way, and we're told to get our pens out and cross out that paragraph. That is not something to be taught, because it is wrong, because it contradicts the Bible. So that was the kind of religious environment in which I was brought up. So, and that was probably the only exposure I had to evolution until I was in my teens.
Wow. Okay. So I'm always curious for people who grew up in a fairly fundamentalist environment, and I think you're right. The word indoctrination is correct there. When you hit the age of reason, let's say 12 or 13, do you have any change of thoughts, or was it just a continuation of what you've been taught?
It was a continuation, pretty much all the way through my teen years. I was a bit of a tortured teen. I think once, I don't know whether it's me as a character or whether it was a side effect of the upbringing I have, but I was a very insular teen, very shy. I didn't really know how to communicate with my peers. I found adults really scary. I remember looking back at one of my old school reports, and one of the notes from my housemaster said something along the lines of, Matthew's matured a bit this year. He's less inclined to tears when he's talking to the teachers.
Yeah. Okay.
And that kind of describes the kind of teenager I was. But I was probably, looking back, I was probably depressed. And the reason why I was depressed was my parents separated around about 9-10 years old, subsequently divorced when I was 11 or 12. And that was hugely traumatic for me. It was an acrimonious separation. And my dad and the woman who became my stepmom lost no time in pushing down my mother. And I adored my mother. I still do adore my mother. You know, she's been dead 11 years, but I adore her and miss her greatly. And that was horrible. If you're a parent, there's one thing you can guarantee to do to destroy the trust of your children, and that's to belittle the other parent.
Yeah.
I can't think of a more effective way of destroying any trust and respect you have in your children. And that happened to me on one side of my parents, and that the negative effect of that, and my own parents' infidelity as well. And I say both of them, they're both Christians I looked up to, and
Right.
I saw all this imperfection rolling out in front of me, and it was hard. It was really, really, really hard to handle, and I think that confusion and that trauma just took me all the way through my teens. I describe my teens as 10 years of misery, to be in many times, because of that, because often going home was faced with all this, and having to be careful what I say, because it'll be put back against me. I didn't enjoy living under the same roof as my stepmother. School was boarding school. Even when I went into my teens, when secondary school, I came to the UK for boarding school. So that was, and then I was bullied at boarding school, but it was relief from my family situation.
Oh, wow.
Wow. So, and so I think, and again, it was a boarding school that was originally set up by its founder as a school for setting in the Christian ethos into orphaned children. So again, it was a school with very much a Christian ethos, but it was very much Church of England, which is a much more liberal organization.
Okay.
So it was very different to the creationist, Calvinist growing up I'd had in missionary Zambia. But I still don't remember much on evolution. It just could be my memory playing tricks on me, but I don't remember learning enough about biology to offset my creationism. So, and I think it must have been just the softly approach that liberal Church of England, liberal Anglicism happens here in the UK. So my Christianity survived all of that, possibly because it was the only thing I had to hold on to.
Right.
Through the trauma of those teens. And then school ended, and it was back to Zambia full time for a couple of years. I worked for my dad. My dad had his own construction firm in Zambia by this time, so spent time working for my father. Did field jobs. By this time I'd fallen in love with computers, so I wanted a career in computers. It was difficult in that environment to have to work in computers, as I was white, so I was privileged. We had a house we had with a wall around it. It was an 8-foot wall with glass across the top of the wall, with gates, with dogs, with servants. So it was completely different environment to the environment that people live in the UK. And I have to be straightforward and honest. I was a privileged white minority in a black country.
Okay.
Let's be honest about that. And I experienced things that sometimes even the nationals probably wouldn't experience because of the privilege that I was exposed to. I hit 18 and I wanted a career in computers. It wasn't going to happen in Zambia. So my dad basically said, right, here's a plane ticket back to London. Here's a check for £250, which should see you through for a month.
Mm-hmm.
Find somewhere to live. You've got a month to find a job. good luck, make your life. And
Wow.
I packed everything that I could carry into a suitcase, and that was my introduction to leaving home. I got on a plane.
Unbelievable. Yeah. And if I could just respond to something you said a little earlier and maybe pertinent to this part of the story as well. You're talking about, having a difficult teenage years. One of the things I think that some of the atheist community sometimes misses is that religion can provide something of value. And so during that time where it was very difficult for you, and maybe we're about to get in your early 20s as well, when you're kind of alone, there's some value to it. It may be based on the wrong thing, but you're deriving something out of it.
Absolutely. Yeah, we shouldn't underestimate the power of belief in situations like that. You believe there is a God there helping you through these situations, and it will work.
Mm-hmm.
You'll get down on your knees and you'll pray for the strength to go through next day, for the patience in the situations that you're in, and that calmness that you seek will come and find you. That doesn't mean there's a God that's giving it to you. You could achieve that through other means. Through meditation or through praying to any other deity. But that belief,
Mm-hmm.
the strength of that belief, does help you through those situations, and I'm pretty sure that it did.
Right.
I mean, I did have friends. I wasn't completely lonely through this. I did have friends and people I could talk to through those times. And I spent holidays with my grandparents sometimes, who were all in England. And there was stability and serenity with my grandparents.
Okay. And I understand that you had a fairly dramatic spiritual experience in your 20s.
I did. So into my 20s, I'm living in the south of England in Kent. I attend a couple of churches, eventually land on an Anglican church where I meet the girl who is now my wife. And one of the things that happened in those in the Anglican church was there were a couple that ran a monthly, they called it a prayer for healing ministry meeting. That would happen once a month in the evening. So they would have prayer, and sometimes there'd be people on the side, witness people being slain in the spirit. Nice, good holy phrase there, which I'm sure is familiar to any of your Christian listeners. And going on around at that same time, my girlfriend was very helpful because I met my girlfriend, and I came with her with all this trauma baggage. My relationship with my father was wavy, is probably the best way I can describe it.
Yeah.
We would have periods where I would just cut off contact with him for a period of time because he'd upset me for one reason or another, or I took offense over one thing or another. And so our relationship was difficult, and I struggled a lot as a result of all the stuff that I've already mentioned.
Yeah.
And so things came to head. Actually, here's one thing. One of the very first things I said to my girlfriend when we were talking, and she said to me one day when I was describing, some of the things that I experienced in Zambia, because if it hasn't become clear yet, I adore the country of Zambia. It's the country that my early years were brought up in. Some of the family holidays were safaris. I just can't imagine a better holiday to send a young child to. The sound of crickets in the evening, the sound of rain on a corrugated tin roof, the smell of the rainstorms, the view of elephants across I just love everything about the country.
It sounds incredible. I'd love to see it someday.
If you ever get the chance, maybe in our offline conversation, I can give you some hints. But anyway, so I was describing one of these things to my girlfriend, and she said something complimentary about how much of a wonderful life I had. And I turned around and I said to her, I'd swap it for your life if it meant my parents were still together.
Wow.
Because she was an English town girl who'd spent her entire life living in the same town, pretty much in the same house. I think they'd moved house once in her life. So our lives from that perspective were contrasts. And the moral of that comment is that that's how much I was damaged from my experience with my parents
Right.
and watching all that. And I've said that phrase multiple times over the years, and I probably still mean it now if I was to say it.
When something as profound as your faith, your understanding of the world that was given to you by your parents, and then you see a level of, is it too far to say hypocrisy, or just they're not living up to the standard that they handed off to you, that would have a profound impact on a person. And it sounds like it has had an impact on you.
Yes, yes, it is. And yes, hypocrisy is probably a good word. You know, like I say, there were a lot of times in my teens where I simply refused to engage with my father, and sometimes I went on for a couple of years. And it was that. And you know, look, with hindsight, maybe I was too harsh and maybe I was too unfair, but that's a teenager's right, isn't it?
Sure. Yeah.
Um,
I've got teenagers, so yes, I'm going through that as the other side of the equation.
yeah. So we're building up. So these evening meetings. So my girlfriend talked me into, or helped me go into counselling. So I went into formal counselling with a Christian counsellor about my relationship with my father, because you know my girlfriend recognised in me that there was damage and there was an unhealthy aspect to this. You know, and let's be frank about it. I was carrying hate, and I was carrying unnecessary hate. It was hurtful to me. It was hurtful to people around me, and I allowed this to spill out into my other relationships, and I needed to deal with it. And so the gracious girl that she helped me to get into counselling. Was there through a couple of the counselling sessions, holding my hand, helping me through it, because it was something I needed to do. And at the end of that counselling, at the end of one of those counselling sessions, it was a spiritual as well as a personal emotional thing. I said, okay, I lay down that hate,
mm-hmm.
And I commit to loving my father again, and I commit to trying to build up that relationship and put effort into that relationship. It didn't go smoothly over the years, but we're on a relationship now, and I'm very pleased that we've got a relationship now. And I'm sad that we missed all those years before. But that was probably a point in which I actually made a concerted commitment. So that came up to a point where I made that commitment, and then these meetings that I was telling you about, one came very soon after that. So I was in an emotionally, I was going to say turmoil, but turmoil is not the right word to use. But I was in an emotionally delicate place at the moment. So I went to this meeting and I went forward for prayer, and it just basically said, I've been through counselling over my relationship with my father. I need help, with my relationship with my father. Can you please pray for me that the bad things are to one side, and and that from today onwards I'll have a better relationship with my father. So that was the background to that. And then I had the whole slain in the spirit experience, and then I lay on the ground, and then I started shaking and moaning and howling, and then people were laying hands on me and casting out demons, and this went on for a while, and it became disruptive, and I got taken out of the meeting room and taken into the church sanctuary because this was clearly not going to be a swift moment. And somebody made a joke of, "Oh, that's got rid of half a dozen demons." And my memory is a bit of a blur. And this was 25 to 30 years ago now, so I have to confess my memory of that event is a little bit blurred, but there are moments. I remember saying afterwards that there was an individual there who was amongst the group that was praying for me, who was definitely an angel. So I spent years saying that I'd seen an angel in that as part of that deliverance experience.
Okay.
And I mean, he was dressed in plain clothes and just like a person, but obviously he was an angel.
Yeah.
And there were other oddities that going through. I wore on my wrists a copper bracelet. One of the things Zambia is famous for is copper.
Okay.
It's one of its biggest exports. But copper isn't going to make you a world economy. It's not got enough value in it to make you a wealthy country, but Zambia is among the world's, or certainly was then, among the world's largest copper exporters.
Okay.
So I had this copper bracelet around my wrist, which just so happened to be in the shape of a snake. So I had a snake's head at one end, and then at the other end it was a snake's tail. And I remember the church vicar lifting my wrist and turning it round and looking at this snake, and doing nothing about it. And then I don't know how long this whole thing went on for, but we got taken back. My flat was literally in the building next door to the church. So I went back to my flat, and somebody escorted me back to the flat and sat with me in my room and just made sure I was okay. And the hand that this copper thing on was shaking. Like if I tell you the Parkinson's shake, it was that kind of shaking. It just wouldn't stop.
Okay.
And it was probably adrenaline. After an experience through that, and it's been traumatic, and you've gone all this, and there's fear involved, and it's what's going on, and if you're there as a young 20-year-old and you believe that these demons are being pulled out of your body, you're going to be scared.
Yeah. Yes, definitely.
And amongst all that, and this hand was shaking, and I took this thing off my wrist, and the hand stopped shaking.
Okay.
Can you imagine the connection you're going to make?
Yeah, definitely. That would be hard to shake.
I would love to hear, all these years later, my wife's version of that. So she wasn't there for the whole of it. She was there for the first half until I got removed from the room, and then when it was over and I walked back out of the church sanctuary again, she was the person there in tears waiting for me to come out again. So it was a hugely emotional thing. And she says to me that the embrace I gave her after that was the first time I told her that I loved her. So again, you've got emotion in amongst all that. So it was a highly, highly charged event.
Right.
And then a couple of days later, and we're going to come back to this event as part of my doubts story.
Okay.
But a couple of days later, there was an event where I woke up. I say in the night, it was probably early hours in the morning, maybe an hour or two before my alarm woke up. And I was lying in bed, it was dark in bed, and I couldn't move. And there was this enormous weight on my chest. And I couldn't move, and my breath was getting shorter. And I could move my eyes, but I couldn't move anything else. And I just felt like there was this monster kneeling on my chest and pushing the air out of me, and I was getting more and more afraid and more terrified. And I thought, what do I do? What do I do? I'm about to die. What's going on here? And I kind of croaked, God, help me.
Okay.
And boom, the weight gone. And I, with all my muscles suddenly tensed up, and I was suddenly sitting up in bed and breathing really deeply. I went, my God, a demon just tried to kill me. And when it's a couple of days after a traumatic event like that, you connect everything together.
Right.
And I was on the phone to my mum the next day, and she said, and I explained it to her, and she said, let me talk to my deacons at church. And she rang me back and said, I spoke over to the deacons. Yeah, we've confirmed it. That was definitely a demonic attack. And from there on, I leapfrogged into exploring the demonic, and that just helped cement all my Young Earth Creationism as well. So I was reading books about people's demonic experience. The church was trying to set up a prayer for healing team, and they invited me onto this prayer for healing team. So I was involved in this, and so I was getting trained to pray for people for healing, and I was part of that for years. And even after we moved and got married and relocated, we were still part of praying for people. That I haven't seen anybody get healed instantly in all of this prayer. I've prayed for lots of people. I've prayed for people who said that felt wonderful, and I've prayed for people who thanked for the prayer and said the prayer definitely helped them. But in all that time, I never witnessed a physical healing of description.
My conservative background was in Pentecostalism, as well as a bunch of charismatic churches, that kind of thing. So I saw very similar things. I didn't experience what you did, but seeing dramatic slaying in the spirit kind of experiences, and identical to you, began to recognize that there really wasn't a real healing taking place. You just didn't see, someone with a real injury or a real disease be healed. And that started to kind of tickle the back of my mind. I'm not sure if that was something for you as well.
I don't remember any doubts when I was in it and doing it.
Okay.
Is my honest answer to that. Actually, no, there's one moment where it was a church weekend away, and the chap was my best friend, my best man when I got married, and then I returned the favor when he got married. We got married about 3 weeks apart.
Okay, yeah.
And he's now a Church of England vicar.
Okay, interesting.
And I'm what I am.
Yeah. Well, first of all, you're blowing me away. All my preconceptions about the Anglican Church and vicars are just blown away at this point.
Excellent. Maybe that's a conversation we can pick up later.
Yeah.
But he and I were praying for this lady, this older lady at this church weekend away, and she said she was struggling with her hearing in one ear, and so we prayed for that ear, and we prayed over it, and we cursed whatever demon might be there and blessed the ear that God might hear it. And my friend said, "Is it any better?" And she said, "No." And so we prayed again. And she said, "I think my hearing's a little bit better, improved now." And I remember thinking at that moment, did she just say that to make us happy?
Right.
So there was, that's the only time looking back I can think of where I actually doubted. I didn't doubt God though. I doubted that the person was telling me the truth.
Right.
So anyway, so this lovely girl I married, we moved house a couple of times, relocated to a different part of the country. I had a couple of jobs, so we've rolled on, 10, 12 years now. So I start a job where I spend quite a bit of time working from home. So I'm sat in my office at home, I'm on my computer. It's the early 2000s. And I thought, what can I do while I'm working? And I discover digital music and iTunes and then podcasts.
Yeah.
And that was it, And so I started listening to podcasts. So I went, Christian podcast. Yeah, I'm really holy Christian podcast. Science podcast. So Skeptic's Guide to the Universe popped in, and Inquiry? What's one of Inquiry?
Point of Inquiry.
Point of Inquiry, that one, yeah, with DJ Grothy, I think, was head of it at that point. And so I discovered those. And then I think the podcast that sowed one of, cause there's many seeds. There wasn't a moment of doubt, then shock horror, the whole thing crumbles. It's like the conversion experience. Christians will tell you, apologists tell you, you need various points in people's lives to get a Christian. You might not convert them in that conversation, but that will be one of the seeds. And it was the opposite way around for me. So one of the seeds was podcast, which I don't believe runs anymore, but it's called Mysterious Universe. Mm-hmm. The guy that ran it, he was well into cryptozoology and various things. And I was listening to it, and sometimes I would think he's being a little bit too credulous, describing some of these things here. And then in one of his better episodes, he described an experience that somebody had, which was very like that bed experience that I described to you a couple of minutes ago after my deliverance experience. Okay, and I just sat up and I paid attention, and he went on. And then he said, yeah, we call this, is it sleep paralysis, and it's a well-known scientific phenomenon. And you went into it, and my head just exploded. And I thought, what is this guy doing to me? And of course, Google came up, and I'm going on. And it was a eureka moment for me. I thought, my Lord, that moment is explained. It was just my trauma.
Right.
It wasn't true. And I didn't know how to process it. And it took me several days. And I was, my mind just kept going back to it. I thought, it's not true. The deliverance was definitely true. But that bit's explained, and I explained it to my wife. And incidentally, my wife had grown up in the English Anglican Church. So she was always a liberal Christian. So she didn't have the fundamentalist, it always goes this way upbringing that I had.
Right.
So so I said to her, and I explained it to her, and I said, and she was like, well, so what's your problem? And I was like, but that means that wasn't true. And she's like, well, so
Yeah.
what's the issue? If that bit isn't true and it's explained, so what does it change? And I'm like, I'm still working on that.
Right.
But it did change because it allowed me to doubt something that I'd firmly held on to as significant.
Exactly. Yeah.
And I think this is the great thing that liberal Christianity brings, is these moments, they don't treasure them to the extent that the fundamentalist ilk does. And so, they can let these things go and encourage them if they're encouraging. And if they're not encouraging or they're not beneficial, well, then why do I need to hold on to it? And I didn't have that benefit, and I was still going through. I thought, if I can doubt it and I can be confident that it's not true, what else can I apply that to?
Right.
And so I did. I started questioning the closest experience, which was a deliverance experience. And I couldn't really get anywhere with that. I could say, well, maybe some of it, maybe the trauma, maybe the handshaking thing, but you can't explain away the angel, you can't explain away those demons, I can't explain, the hyperventilating, that fuzzy feeling in my face when I was like that, I can't explain any of that, and everything else. And it certainly doesn't disprove God and all those prayers I've prayed. And it certainly doesn't disprove creationism and all that. And so, roll on a couple more years now, I'm listening to more science podcasts, and the science podcasts are just awesome, just brilliant. Astronomy Cast was one of the first ones I found, and the tagline for Astronomy Cast is explaining how we know what we know.
Right.
And that phrase sunk in, and they would explain things, and they'll explain why the things, and they would explain how we can be confident about the distance of objects from us, and why X billion light years is a reasonable number in the Doppler shift, and and why we can be confident on that. And when this information starts seeping in, and I thought there must be a counter to this, so I go and listen to a Christian podcast, and these couple of creationist ministers are talking, and they're saying, well, people say that the moon and the earth are 4 billion years old, and that the moon is receding away from us. But if you go and measure the distance from the moon, which is 250,000 miles away, and how far it's receding, and calculate it back, you get to a point where the moon's touching the earth. And well, that's obviously nonsense, because if the moon's touching the earth, it can't start receding away. And I stopped and I thought, that's their argument? Really?
Yeah.
Is that the sum total of their explanation? I've listened to hours and hours of Astronomy Cast where they've explained these things. I've listened to hours of geology where they've explained things. I've listened to hours of biology, and you try and explain it away with 4 seconds of utter nonsense about the moon.
Right.
And I think at that point, I just went through and I deleted half of the Christian podcast that I listened to. I said, I'm just not having that. And it was just that gradual shift. And so the creationism died first.
Okay.
And I thought, okay, so I'm not a creationist. Okay, so I'm an old earth creationist. Cool.
Yes. Yeah.
But, and I'm shortcutting. I mean, the entire process probably took between 3 and 4 years, my process of my deconversion.
Okay.
Because let's kill a myth here. No one wakes up one morning and goes, you know what? I can't be bothered to be a Christian anymore. I'm going to be an atheist.
Right.
It doesn't work like that. It takes time, and it's a process. And your thinking and the things that you hold dear, these have to be peeled away. I'm going to say like an onion.
Yeah. Yeah.
Have to come off layer by layer. You don't kill all those beliefs just by going, I don't fancy believing them anymore. They have to come off one by one. And it's like a plaster that's stuck to the hairiest part of your body. It hurts when it comes off,
Yeah.
and it either comes off quickly and causes you a buttload of pain. Am I allowed to say that?
Yes, you can. Yes.
Or you pull it off really, really slowly and it still hurts.
Yeah. Yeah, definitely. I often say that belief is not a choice, right? You're convinced or you're not convinced. And the process leading to that is like you say, it can be 1,000 points up to that. But once that line is crossed, it's no longer, just like you say, you don't wake up and say, I don't want to be a Christian anymore. That isn't what happens for those of us who have deconverted.
No. For the entirety of those 3 years, I wanted to be a Christian. Giving up Christianity was never my end goal. It was never the point that I sought. Right. It was never a piece of a word or a sentence that I wanted to write on a piece of paper or type into a computer. It was never on my radar at any point throughout that process. It just wasn't there. I had to work out how I was going to rejig my Christian faith in order to retain it. That was my end goal at every point throughout that process. It was never a choice. Right. And I can't stress that more strongly. In fact, one of your early episodes, you had exactly that conversation with one of your guests, and I want to absolutely endorse that opinion. And I can't imagine, I don't think I've heard an atheist say anything other than that. And I don't think that will ever happen.
Yeah, particularly for those of us who did have faith. I do draw a line between, again, that's why my question about the age of reason. So if you're 12 years old and you were in a Christian household, but at 12 you decided, you know what, I don't believe this, and you move on. That experience is slightly different than when you carry that into your adulthood and you find that you are defending your faith as an adult. And then when that crumbles, that's a whole nother experience.
Yeah, absolutely.
Clearly that you've gone through.
Yeah. So as soon as I realized that being a young earth creationist couldn't work, well, I went to the obvious place. I said, well, Adam and Eve, what do I do about Adam and Eve? But it's not just Adam and Eve. It's the flood, the Tower of Babel,
right? Joseph,
the Exodus from Egypt. Well, then if I start doubting those, then the prophets, those stories suddenly become a little bit more questionable, and go, hang on a minute, the entire foundation for the existence of Jesus Christ has just been removed. Did Jesus even exist? Okay, it wasn't that quick, but those were the steps that went along, because I'll still say it today, the literalist creationist interpretation of the Bible is probably the most honest interpretation of the Bible.
I agree. Yes, we can have that discussion maybe later.
But I'm not there anymore. So how do I interpret it? And I need to rewind actually a little bit. While I was still a signed up creationist, one of my passions is cars. So for a period of time, I owned an old rally car. It had been driven by a rally driver called Robbie Head in the 80s. It had gone out of regular rally use, and I managed to become the owner of it. I did this, and I did a couple of track days and got involved with a couple of car clubs, and I had brilliant times, spending disposable income at the weekends, just burning petrol and rubber around their field. But some of these guys, and I still chat with them online on a regular basis. We're a bunch of about 30 of us, and we talk nonsense on a forum on the internet that's just close to us. We're pretty much all IT professionals, with a couple of odd exceptions. We all have peculiar interests in cars. But I got involved with these people for the cars. Mm-hmm. So, and I made a conscious effort. These are not people I'm going to evangelize. This is for the cars. But it comes out eventually. And it came out that I was a creationist, and the polemic came.
Right.
And this particular day, I thought, sod it, I'm fighting back. So I went for it, and the long and short of it is, they whooped me. These are intelligent people. Their arguments were straightforward, were blunt, and I interpreted them as being rude and unkind.
Right.
And it was really, really, in fact, if you've listened to the polemic episode of Atheist Anything, I make reference to this moment in that episode, and it was a deeply, deeply unpleasant experience for me going through that. Having people who I respected, people I liked, just piling on hot and unforgiving polemic on me, and couldn't defeat the logic and the facts that were in their arguments. I tried and I tried, and I thought, well, and that was again one of the drivers that drove me into listening to science podcasts, reading science content on websites.
Mm-hmm.
And it was just one of those moments which broke my creationism.
Right.
And again, it would be a few years before I admitted to these people that I was out as an atheist. You know, some of them may have worked it out, but yeah, it was a couple of years later, after I'd already decided that I deconverted, that I came to them and said, guys, congratulations. Yeah, there's officially no God.
Right.
And yeah, so the creationism started unpeeling, and with that, you know, became various bits of the Bible, which I realized I just could no longer believe, because I can't question creationism and believe those things as being literal events, you know, and if they're interpretive, well, how far can you go? You know, where do you draw the line? During that very conversation, one of these friends asked the question and said, if you're allowed to interpret some parts of the Bible, how do you differentiate between those that you can and those that you can't? Where do you draw the line? What's the bit? And it's true, it's a valid question, because you go around different people and they'll give you different criteria or different places. And that was another one of those realizations. And so I just more of these things started floating away. And then one of my blog posts, I don't know if you've managed to read it, but it was near the end. One of the blog posts is titled, "Suddenly I realized I could no longer be a Christian," or something like that.
Right.
But the suddenly doesn't describe my journey. The suddenly describes my awareness.
Yes.
And I just had this moment, and I was just thinking it through, and I was just trying to work out, and I was trying to, where do I draw the line? I had many, many days when I was sitting like this, and I go, where do I draw the line? And I'm mostly going to church still at this time, and I'm, you know, got Christian friends, and we all catch the same train into London in the mornings, and we talk together. And I think, do I talk these doubts through these friends? Who is it? Because I wanted to talk it through with someone, but I didn't know who I could have that conversation with.
Right.
And I was afraid of having that conversation with my wife, because I didn't want to hurt her.
Yeah.
And that was the reason for it. I wasn't afraid of her. I couldn't answer the question, how do I say something to the person I adore most in the world that I know is going to hurt them? How do I say that? How do I even broach it? And even thinking about that question brought so much fear into me. I couldn't do it. I've got no other way to justify or explain that. If that makes me a bad husband, I'm going to wear that label. That is the position I was in.
Yeah, if I can jump in, I can say for sure I had almost exactly the same experience. My wife is very much a believer. All the points that you've made, you know, they ring very true. That it was a journey, and then the awareness was sudden.
Yes.
But after that sudden awareness, for me, it took me several months before I could tell my wife, because I knew this is going to put a knife in her heart and twist it. And I can remember the moment I told her, and my heart was racing, and that was a dramatic moment when I told her, and I was as gentle and oblique as possible. I'm having some doubts, which was a massive understatement. And then, kind of led her into, really, I'm an atheist. And so I can completely understand how difficult that conversation is.
Yeah. I did it differently, so we can compare notes on who's the worst husband then.
Okay.
Yeah, so I think I was even just walking down the street, and I was just going through, what can I accept? What can't I accept? And then it popped into my head. I thought, well, there's none of it. You don't believe. And it was like this weight fell off my shoulders, and I walked taller by an inch. And I thought, I'm okay.
Yeah.
I don't have to believe. I don't have to. I don't accept it. I don't have to accept it. It changes nothing.
Right.
It changes everything. And it was like, wow, awesome. And it was genuinely a weight lifting off my shoulders at that moment of realization that I was free.
That's amazing.
Our situation by that time was the church we were going to. My wife was on the diaconate. We were going to a Baptist church by this time in our lives.
Okay.
Which Baptist church in England, it shouldn't be confused with Baptists and Southern Baptists that you describe in America. It's not necessarily associated with fundamentalist Christianity, although there might be some Baptist churches which have a form of fundamentalism, but generally Baptist in the UK is a brand not too dissimilar to the Church of England Anglican Church. Practically the only difference is the method of baptism.
Right.
They have liturgy. They sing similar songs. It's the UK Baptist Church is a much more liberal organisation. So let's try not to get confused over words here. So, but anyway, the particular church we're going to. So my wife was on the leadership, on the diaconate of the church, and would occasionally preach. And there'd been a couple of issues in the church. I don't want to spill too many beans and say too many harsh things, but there was a relationship issue with the pastor. And I used that as an opportunity to stop going to church.
Okay. And
so it worked for me, and it was convenient for me. So I didn't have to go to church because I didn't believe, and it was convenient for me for my wife to accept that it was just part of a relationship that was less than ideal, and I didn't fancy going anymore. And I let that ride because it suited me.
Right.
So that went on for a couple of years until we relocated again. So now we're in the west coast of the UK, near the sea, the different environment. And then we have the conversation, well, we've got a new Baptist church to go to. You're going to come with me, aren't you, Matthew?
Right.
And we're going to become members of the church. So I attend for a couple of weeks, and then we go to have the conversation about church membership. And of course, I'm backed into a corner now. I've wasted 4 years or however many years it is of opportunities to come clean.
Right.
And now we're having the conversation, and I say, I can't be a member. And that's when it was sprung on her. She didn't see it coming. She was expecting a supportive husband to join this new church that in this new area that we'd joined to, and church life was going to be different. And I told her, actually, no, church life isn't going to be different.
Right.
And yeah, it's not pleasant for a believing partner to hear that. Fear had brought me to this point. And the first question she asked me was, well, what about your deliverance experience? How do you explain that, if you can explain everything? And I'm like, well, I can explain bits, but I can't explain all of it.
Right.
And it's like, so what? I still don't believe in God.
Yeah.
And it's like, I can't be a member.
Yeah.
It was difficult for her. It upset her, and I have to own up to that. In being the coward and trying not to hurt the person I adored the most, I hurt the person I adored the most.
I appreciate your honesty about that. I think one of the conversations that we don't have enough is what my friend Captain Cassidy from Roll to Disbelieve blog says is the unequally yoked club. Many, many people get married with the understanding that faith is a part of that marriage, and then one person loses their faith. And I think if we're more open about it and honest the way that you are, telling your story here and telling your wife, even if it took a little while, that's one of the things that we need to get out there to talk to people about. How do you lovingly tell the person you've committed your life to that you no longer believe in the thing they think is the foundation of your marriage?
Yeah. And to the person who has the answer to that, please tell the 30-year-old, please go back in time and find me when I'm 30. Tell me how to do that, because 30-year-old myself, who's still a Christian, really needs that information.
Right. Exactly.
During this time, it was around about that time that I went online to find people in similar situations. And during that process, I went online to find people in similar situations. I found loads of blogs of exes, and it was the same story everywhere.
Hmm.
a long, painful, drawn out deconversion process, hurt family members, sometimes rejected by family members, sometimes marriages collapsing. And again, when you're going through this process and you're reading on blogs about people whose world has fallen apart as part of their deconversion process, and you're looking for comfort, and you're going, I don't want my world to fall apart.
Right.
I don't want my marriage to fall apart. I'm reading stories of people who've gone through the same process. And all their believing family members have rejected them, disowned them, their marriages have died. And you're trying to seek shelter from your fear. But these aren't providing shelter from all of those fears. And in some cases, actively feeding them.
Right.
But people are telling their raw stories because this process hurts, and these people need support, and these people need a community of other people who understand. So that's how I got involved in blogging, and I got involved in talking on other people's blog pages and helping with my story. And I'd take advice and comfort from people who'd done the road before, and then I'd pass on advice and comfort to those who are new to it and were coming on. And yeah, it's a process, and people going through this process need their community, and they need that community to be other people who either know what they're going through, who are also going through it, and can share that comfort, can cry their tears with them and say, no, it's not going to be all right. There's going to be hurt. There's going to be sorrow. There's going to be pain. No, you don't know how that conversation is going to end. But there are people here who are going to hold your hand. I nearly said hold your soul there. But there are people who are going to share that with you, and some of those people will be at the end of a phone if you really, really need it.
Right. One of the things that I'm cognizant of is, we've been throwing around the term deconversion, which means something to you and I, but for people who are right at the beginning of the loss of their faith, they don't even know what to Google for, really, right? And so I'm constantly talking about how half of the difficulty is finding each other, is finding this community of people who are going through the same thing. And that's why I do this podcast. I think it's cathartic for us to tell our stories, to share our experiences, and to acknowledge that how painful it can be, but that there also is freedom on the other side of that.
Yes, there is. And search for doubts. Don't be afraid of typing that word in. When I look at the stats for my blog, I don't get a lot of hits on atheism keywords.
Right.
But doubts and questioning and loss of faith, that kind of phrase and keyword are words that people use to find my blog. I don't often get hit with people who are already there and already happy with the word atheist or atheism.
Right.
Although, incidentally, just as an aside, the most popularly read page on my blog is one called God Takes the Good People Early. And I wrote that blog post after a conversation with somebody who said there are people who believe that God takes the good people early. And it was when we were talking about death.
Right.
And that phrase, God taking the good people early, is a phrase that hits my blog quite a lot. And it's right up there in the top 10 of search phrases that hit my blog. And that results in that particular blog post being the most well-read blog post on my blog. And I find that quite concerning.
Right.
It bothers me. It doesn't make me happy that there's a God that people believe in who would actively take away the holier people first. I don't understand the logic that would end in that. It baffles me. I don't get the theology that drives that. But anyway, that's just an aside.
Yeah, no, and it's really interesting to the way you phrase that, right? It's because we have compassion for the humanity of people and the suffering that they're going through, and we recognize that the pat answers aren't helpful. And just as an aside to the aside, if you're a blogger or a content creator out there, take every pat answer you've ever heard, and we know that that's going to get you some Google hits. So.
Yes, it is, and enjoy the ride.
Yeah, exactly. Matthew, I want to segue here to some of your work. You've already mentioned that you started off blogging. I'd be curious to hear the story of how the group of you that got together that began to respond to Justin Brierley's Unbelievable podcast. What was that process like?
Okay, yeah, it's actually a really good point to move into that. So I think we've moved in quite smoothly. So well done. You're clearly a well seasoned host there. So congratulations on that. So I got involved in listening to podcasts and several Christian podcasts, and I don't know how I found it, but I landed on the Unbelievable podcast, which incidentally manages to be the only Christian podcast that has survived the cuts.
Right.
I've dipped in and out of a few others, which I listen to here and there. But Justin's Unbelievable. And I've used this phrase before. It's corny, but I'll use it again. It is the only religious podcast that I will listen to religiously.
Right. Yes.
That's a credit. There aren't many podcasts that cross the divide. Christian podcasts tend to be predominantly listened to by Christians, and atheist podcasts tend to be predominantly listened to by atheists. And there aren't many that cross over the divide. And if me as an atheist needs to get to Christians, I need to go into their territory.
Right.
There's not much that's attractive about atheism that will attract Christians to me. So I need to go to them. And, and it's probably the same the other way around. And Justin's podcast stands out as one that has broken that barrier.
Right.
So I've been a listener for several years. I don't know what the date is, but it's around about the time that he did his atheist prayer experiment, whenever that was. Now we're rolling back several years.
Okay.
Five or 6 years, maybe. Somebody fact check me on it. But that was around about the time. But I listened to him from the beginning. I hit all the backlog. So by the time I got to the prayer experiment episodes, the prayer experiment was over. But there we go.
Right.
But for calendar purposes, that's where it is. And so I listened to it. I've responded to it a couple of times. He's read out 3 or 4 of my missives to him over the years. And there were many times, and several people have said this, atheists who wanted to respond to subjects he was doing or points he was making. At the time, I didn't feel anywhere near confident enough to try podcasting. And I tried writing down responses, but, time gets in the way to sit down and to listen to, an hour and a half, 2 hours of podcasts, to write down a rebuttal, to listen to it again, to write it down. That takes a lot of dedicated effort. And by the time you've done one, there's been 2 more episodes out.
Right.
And they're coming through at such a regularity. It's practically impossible to do that. And Brian Blaze, who has been on our Still Unbelievable podcast, he said something similar. He wanted to do a rebuttal to many of Justin's episodes. And time just makes it impossible.
Right.
But I was getting involved in the Facebook group chat and responding that and engaging, and then also on the Discuss forums on the Premier website as well, and discussing there. And then one of the chaps, David Johnson, put up a post, said, we're doing and that's it. Justin said he was going to do a book. And I thought, a response to this book, that would be a brilliant idea. And then I saw this post by David Johnson saying a couple of us want to do a response to Justin's book. Who's on board? And I was like, yes, I'm on board.
Yeah.
So that was a couple of years ago now, maybe tail end of 2016. So I got on board with that right from the very first time I saw the invitation to that done. So I emailed in, and then a couple of other people emailed in, and we sort of had a couple of conference calls, and we used Slack to put some notes up, and we started collaborating, and then we started getting our chapters out, and we wanted the book to be out by the end of the year that Justin's book came out. And I went to the Unbelievable conference on the day which was where Justin released his book. And so I've got my signed copy of Justin's book here sat on the desk next to me. And I read through it, and I thought, right, and we started divvying out who was going to write what and what chapters we're going to respond to, and then a bit of additional content that we would put on. And I really enjoyed the process. We had different people, none of whom I'd engaged with before. We've got one guy who YouTubes as Skydive Phil, brilliant guy, highly intelligent.
Yeah.
He can talk cosmology forever.
Right.
Go and watch his videos if anyone hasn't seen them. So he wrote a couple of chapters. Then you've got David, who's a former pastor, I believe, and then Ed as well, who was former church leader. I've not been a church leader, but I've been involved in leadership, and I've led youth groups and all that. And and then Andrew with his history, and then Sarah as well. And we all came in together, and we all brought in our different chapters and bits of editing, etc. And then I got the job of collating it all together into one document, and then making sure all the fonts matched and all the indenting matched. That takes time, and just going through that, and then just doing the final last check of going through the editing and put it back to the guys for publishing up onto the website and onto Amazon. I think we were a couple of months later. It was almost a year after Justin's book came out that this book came. We got ours out, and it was a fabulous experience. I would welcome an opportunity to repeat that.
Yeah.
We need to rethink about what to do more. There's content in Justin's book that hasn't been touched in our response book. There's possibly other subjects that we want to do, so maybe we can add to it. If there's anybody out there who's read Justin's book and our book and feels that they want to contribute, and am I allowed to do a plug for that?
Yeah, definitely.
Contact us through reasonpress.net. We would love to hear from you if you feel that there's a chapter that you want to write and you don't know where to put it. Contact us. We'll see if we can arrange an edition to get that out, and because it'll be great to refresh the content. It's been 2 years now, so let's rethink it through. Don't let the wheel stop rolling.
Right. Yeah, a couple of comments. Number one, I was very impressed to see that it's a Creative Commons license, which means that just anybody can go read that. That was
always the intention. Make it free, possible to be free. The Amazon, we have to put minimum price on Amazon, which is 99p or 99 cents.
Right.
All of that money, we sell a few copies each month. All of that money goes to a charity. When it just builds up to a certain level, it just gets extracted and donated to a charity. We're not going to get rich off that. There's going to be a movie deal from it. So, if you want to read it on a Kindle, that's where your money goes.
Yeah. Okay. Well, that's actually really cool to hear. But the other comment I wanted to make is what's important here for the listeners to realize is that, Justin is engaged with you guys. You guys, a couple of you have been on his podcast. So what was that interaction like? Do you find him to be an honest interlocutor, or?
I have to hedge my answers on this because I wasn't involved in the direct communications with Justin. So I know you're going to be talking with Andrew. So probably ask Andrew that question as well.
Okay.
But yes, Justin was made aware of it from the very beginning because we publicized it on the Premier Christian Radio, who host Unbelievable, on their Discuss forums that we're doing it, and we were updating people on progress. So we never hid that that's what we wanted to do. I believe it was David that had most of the communication with Justin on that. Okay. And Justin was on board, and Justin released to us an advanced table of contents. Obviously, we were committed to promise not to share that, which we didn't. And I think, if I remember rightly, it did actually change subtly anyway. But table of contents on a book is going to change, Yeah. But it gave us a heads up of the kind of things to expect in the book. So some of us wrote chapters in preparation in advance, and the book came out, and we bought a couple of copies and distributed them, and we read our book, and then we rearranged some of the work and the chapters that were done. I actually saved my writing until I'd actually read the book, and then wrote my chapter after I'd already written. Okay. Yeah, Justin was fair on that. When I chatted to Justin briefly at the launch of the book, very pleasant conversation. I find him a very fair person to talk to. Okay. And to engage with, and as he says in the opening of his book, good conversations matter and they're important, and I want to endorse that sentiment. And he followed that up by being open with us and by welcoming the project. And then when the book went out and he read the book, and he had Andrew and David onto his show to discuss the book, which is an interesting episode in itself.
Yeah, and the other thing that is interesting, the reason that I'm aware of your podcast is that Justin tweeted out, "If you're interested in hearing a response," so
Yes.
that's how I found the podcast. So
I suspected that was probably the case. So, yeah, so the book had been out for a while. Then I don't know so I got involved with Ask an Atheist Anything first. And I think Andrew and David were going to run with that. Anyway, Ask an Atheist Anything wasn't my idea, but I got asked, do you want to be involved as one of the co-hosts? So Andrew and I co-host Ask an Atheist Anything. And then David and Andrew picked up Still Unbelievable, although for listeners, I've been involved in many of the recent episodes of Still Unbelievable. But for the co-hosts of Still Unbelievable, we count all the authors of the
right.
book, even if not all of them have been on it. But hopefully that will be something we'll be able to rectify.
So you're a busy guy, is what
Yes, I am. Podcasting is much more fun than I expected it to be. I got to know these people over the couple of years while we were preparing and then writing the book. And Andrew specifically, he and I have developed a friendship over that time. That's not to degrade any of the other people involved. It's just Andrew and I have developed a friendship, and it's magnified doing Ask an Atheist Anything with him, and I really enjoyed doing that with Andrew. But yeah, if I'd realized that I'd enjoyed podcasting this much, I'd have probably tried my hand at it earlier. But it takes time. I've got to schedule a couple of hours in my evening for this chat with you. Andrew's in the USA, I'm in the UK, so we've always got to juggle time together. And because we're co-hosts, we do regular catch-ups every few days, even if we're not doing a recording. And and then when we're sending emails around to people to try to get people on board, there's always time zones to do. The most fun one, the most fun episode that we did of Ask an Atheist Anything was with Ernest in Australia. So we had Ernest in Australia, me in the UK, Andrew in good old US of A, and juggling the time zones for that was really quite amusing. And there was, who's going to draw the short straw?
Right.
Because someone's either got to be up late or someone's got to be up early.
Right, exactly. Yeah.
And that was a fun episode to record, and it'll be, hopefully we'll get Ernest back on again for another one. Yeah, he was fabulous to talk to.
So Matthew, I'm cognizant of our time here, but I prepped this question because I'm curious. I'm going to ask Andrew this question as well. Who is the target audience for Christian apologetics? And then the flip side of the coin, who do you think is the target audience for the kind of counter apologetics, as it were, that many of the atheist community create?
Good question. This is one of those questions that deserves a week to think about
beforehand.
Yeah.
No, I'm just going to put you on the spot. What do you think?
The most fun answers are always answers where you're put on the spot. I think the target for Christian apologetics is the convincible unbeliever. Mm-hmm. Because I can't just say any unbeliever, because I'm an unbeliever and apologetics doesn't work on me.
Right.
I've been through it. I've thought through it. I've challenged it, and it doesn't survive the cut for me. So I don't know. Maybe an apologist might think that I am his target, but it's my armor's impervious to those fiery darts.
Right.
So it's got to be the convincible unbeliever. Those that they can get on side, those they can get on board. Those are the people that are going to be the target. And the flip.
Yeah. Who do you think are the type of people that you write that book for?
I'm going to say everyone. And the reason is I don't necessarily want to deconvert people. I've qualified that. Mm-hmm. And I'm going to qualify it by referring to an answer. One of the big episodes of Ask an Atheist Anything we did was the question show special. And one of the questions was about, do you want to deconvert people? And I gave quite a long answer to that one. And my question was basically, in a nutshell, deconversion isn't my goal, because I know that deconversion is a slow and painful process. But if I am there when you deconvert, my response is not hallelujah. My response is, how are you? Do you need a hug? Do you need a friend?
Well said.
And so with that knowledge, the deconversion process is potentially traumatic and painful, I don't want to go out with the intention of causing that on anybody. But however, if it does have that effect on you, I want to be a friend, or I want to make sure that you have a friend for that time, because everybody who's in that moment needs a friend. And I wish I had more of them who were physical with me when I was going through that. And I want whoever goes through that to have somebody who can be physical with them, because it's such an earth and life-shattering experience that people going through that deserve to have flesh friends. So I don't want to intentionally put anybody through that. Mm-hmm. So, but I want people to hear the arguments. It's the same reason why I butt up against conspiracy theories. When something that has been said that is challengeable, then it should be challenged. Mm-hmm. So if somebody wants to assert something as truth and as fact, then I want to see it challenged, not necessarily to change somebody else's mind, but because inaccuracy needs to be faced up to. So I guess, first of all, that's what I want to do. I want to stand up to inaccuracy. I want to stand up to things that should be challenged. And I want to stand up for two things which are untrue. And then if a side effect of that, people who are wavering, people who are convincible, people who are beginning to doubt, people who haven't yet started questioning even, mm-hmm. If those people need to hear those sides and need to hear the language and need to hear the reasons why they should question those things that are being told to them. So that's why I do what I do.
That is incredibly well said. And now I'd like to give you the opportunity to let all of those people know how they can get in touch with you. So if we haven't plugged something already, what do we need to plug, and how can they reach you and your work?
Reasonpress.net is the website to go to, or into your search engine of choice, search for the Ask an Atheist Anything podcast. It's hosted on Anchor, but we filter it out through all the major podcast feeds. Still Unbelievable is the other one, which I've tried. Incidentally, I've got an Alexa device at home, and so every morning I shout at my Alexa device, play. I use the AnyPod skill. So I say, ask AnyPod to play me Unbelievable. So in the morning, I get my 20 minutes of Unbelievable before I need to go to work. I've tried asking Alexa to play Still Unbelievable. She doesn't get the difference. She still plays me Unbelievable.
Interesting. Yeah.
So I've got two comments on it. If you're going to name a podcast, be careful how you name it.
Yeah, yes.
And the other thing is, if anyone has found a way around that, please tell me, because I would really like to know.
And well, maybe it's because Alexa, the AI, is actually a Christian, and so she's filtering.
I've not asked that question, and now yes. I'm scared to. So those are the ways to find me. Those are the easiest ways to find me. Don't Google my name on Facebook, because my name is such a common name. You'll probably not find me underneath the politicians and the sportsmen and the stuntmen and the actors and anything else. I'm so far down the list, you won't find me. So reasonpress.net, Ask an Atheist Anything, or Still Unbelievable. Catch up with us anyway. And Anchor has this cool feature where you can tap a link and leave a voice message for the host if you can't be bothered to type out a note. So shout us a message. It'll be brilliant to hear from you. Maybe have you on one of the shows. Ask us any question you like. It doesn't even have to be a question about theology or atheism. It really is anything. And if you want to know which is the best operating system, it's obviously Windows, but ask us that anyway, and we'll have you on and talk about that too.
Yes, I will have an opinion. Matthew, thank you so much for your time. I think your story is amazing, and your heart for people, your compassion really comes true in your discussion. And I think people need to hear that. So thank you so much for being on the podcast.
Oh, thank you, David. I've really enjoyed this chat.
Final thoughts on the episode. As you can clearly see, Matthew is an incredibly eloquent storyteller, and his deconversion story is both dramatic and telling. First off, his descriptions of spiritual experiences, including physical manifestations, really rang similar to me and some of my experiences. For those of you who have been a part of charismatic or Pentecostal churches, it will also sound very familiar. For those of you who have not been a part of those kinds of churches, it will sound very, very strange. The point I want to make is that the human experience of what we assume are spiritual experiences often are emotionally induced, and they can have physical manifestations, such as Matthew describing his shaking wrist. The main point I want you to draw from this is the problem with subjective experience as proof of the divine. As Matthew began to understand the natural explanations for his experiences, that tore down his faith. Another point I want to highlight that's very similar to my story is the disappointment in apologetic arguments. After hearing science podcasts talk about the evolution of the cosmos, and then listening to a Christian podcast or Young Earth Creationist podcast talk about the distance from the moon to the earth, and the weakness of those arguments, Matthew's response was, "Is that it? Is that all you've got?" And I felt the same way when I read the book The Privileged Planet, which is one of the better intelligent design books, and yet even that is no good at all. The arguments are terrible. And I find that apologetics often have the opposite effect. Now, as a secular humanist and an atheist, my favorite quote is from Daniel Dennett. "There is nothing I like less than bad arguments for a view I hold dear." And that describes most of my Christianity and the apologetics that at one point in time I felt were convincing. I want to just highlight Matthew's understanding of the deconversion process and his compassion for those going through it. A few quotes leapt out at me. Quote, "Suddenly I realized I could no longer be a Christian. The suddenly doesn't describe my journey. The suddenly describes my awareness." End quote. That is a fantastic description of the process. Often the changes happen over a very long period of time, but the awareness of it can be sudden. Another quote, "This process hurts. If I am there when you deconvert, my response is not hallelujah. My response is, how are you? Do you need a hug? Do you need a friend?" Matthew recognizes the difficulty of going through this process and the desperate need that we have to find one another and to give each other comfort during a very difficult time in our lives. Lastly, I want to point out Matthew's description of taking so long to tell his wife. As I mentioned in the podcast, one of the things we haven't talked about enough is for those of us who are in relationships with believers, we need to support each other in those circumstances. I quote Captain Cassidy of the Roll to Disbelieve blog, as she calls this the Unequally Yoked Club. I highly recommend her blog. I'll have links in the show notes, and I hope to have Cassidy on the show in the near future. Thanks again to Matthew Taylor for being my guest and being so honest about his story. I hope that all of you who are going through the deconversion process find a friend as good as Matthew Taylor. Time for some footnotes. The song is a track called Waves by Micaiah Beats. Please check out her music. Links will be in the show notes. If you'd like to help support the podcast, here are the ways you can go about that. First, help promote it. The podcast audience grows by word of mouth. If you found it useful or just entertaining, please pass it on to your friends and family. Post about it on social media so that others can find it. Please rate and review the podcast wherever you get your podcasts. This will help raise the visibility of our show. Join me on the podcast. Tell your story. Have you gone through a faith transition? You want to tell that to the world? Let me know and let's have you on. Do you know someone who needs to tell their story? Let them know. Do you have criticisms about atheism or humanism, but you're willing to have an honesty contest with me? Come on the show. If you have a book or a blog that you want to promote, I'd like to hear from you. Also, you can contribute technical support. If you are good at graphic design, sound engineering, or marketing, please let me know and I'll let you know how you can participate. And finally, financial support. There will be a link on the show notes to allow contributions which would help defray the cost of producing the show. If you want to get in touch with me, you can Google Graceful Atheist, or you can send email to gracefulatheist@gmail.com. You can tweet at me at gracefulatheist, or you can just check out my website at gracefulatheist.wordpress.com. Get in touch and let me know if you appreciate the podcast. Well, this has been the Graceful Atheist Podcast. My name is David, and I am trying to be the Graceful Atheist. Grab somebody you love and tell them how much they mean to you. This has been the Graceful Atheist Podcast.